Well, I'm excited to be with you guys tonight. My life got changed in this room. The entire trajectory of my life was altered by being a part of this ministry. Back in the day, it was called something else, but it was the same mindset. Let's get together, let's have friends, let's have worship, let's read the Bible, and let's meet in small groups. How many of you are part of Spectrum groups? Yeah. If you're not raising your hand, I hope that you join as soon as you have that opportunity to join. Well, let's pray and get into this. Father, we ask that you would do tremendous things in this room tonight. God, I ask that maybe there are those who are distracted. Maybe there are those who are thinking about what they're going to be doing after service. Maybe there are people distracted by much more painful things, weightier things, knowing what's going on at home and not being able to escape from the pain that maybe they feel. But God, I ask that for tonight and for these next moments, that we would all have the opportunity and the capacity to lean in and to hear what you have for us. God, we ask that our ears would be open to hear your truth. And I believe that when your truth is unleashed, the opportunity for life change is just immense. And so we invite you into this place. We invite you in to speak to us. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, how many of you have done one of those escape rooms? Anybody out there done an escape room? Super fun. If you haven't yet, they're really expensive, but apart from the expensive part, they're just a lot of fun. And if you haven't done one of them, kind of the idea is that this entire event is a riddle. You're put in this room with like 6, maybe 10 other people at the most, and you just kind of have to figure out, okay, how do I get out of this room? And sometimes the way that you get out of that room is you find like this secret little hidden trap door and you unlock it, and then you get a clue, and then you have to decipher this code, and then once you've deciphered that leads you to another safe that you can unlock, and then that safe has a combination that you enter over there, and then you can get, and then eventually you find your way out of the room. And if you do it in less than an hour, they take pictures of you and they celebrate, and if you do it in less than an hour, everyone boos and you're never invited back. No, that's not true. They'll gladly take your money any time of the week. You can go back as many times as you want. But I think that a lot of times we treat understanding the will of God in our lives kind of like an escape room, where we feel like, man, I want to know God's will, but I'm not a detective. Like, I don't know how to decipher all of these codes in the Bible. I don't know what he wants me to do. Like, what job should I be pursuing? What girl should I be dating? What guy should I be going after? What classes should I be signing up for? What colleges should I be applying to? And we just say, God, what do you want with me? Like, I don't know. And my hope, my prayer for tonight is that we would all be able to leave breathing a little easier, understanding that the will of God is not a secret code that has to be deciphered for each of our lives, but it is simple. And I'm going to give it to you right now. And it's actually the title of our message. All of me, always. Can you say that with me? All of me, always. All of me, always. You can turn to Romans chapter 12. We're going to be in verses 1 and 2, and we're going to be spending our entire time tonight in those 2 verses. Romans chapter 12. Did you guys bring a Bible tonight? Anyone bring Bibles? Yeah. Or phones? People have phones? You're reading the Bible on your phone? That's good too. Romans chapter 12, verse 1. Paul's writing, and he says, I beseech you, this is the New King James, so a little throwback. He says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you would present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. We've got 3 points tonight, and our first is all of life is all for Jesus. All of life is all for Jesus. Now, that second word that we read, I beseech, that's kind of like a throwback word. Anybody use the word beseech on a daily basis? Yeah, one person maybe. Oh, some of you are just like brainiacs. It's like, yeah, of course, Mom, I beseech you for some Cocoa Pebbles. Like, no, probably none of us use that term. It comes to us from the New King James, but it's important for us to understand the attitude with which Paul is communicating. So Paul is writing this letter to Christians, and he says, I beseech. And the idea of beseech is to beg or to implore, to plead with someone. So I don't know what the really hot items on the market are, but I remember when I was in middle school, the thing that I had to have was a PlayStation. I was like, Mom, you don't understand, my life is not complete until I have this PlayStation. And so every time that we went to Target or Walmart or anywhere that had a PlayStation, I was beseeching her. Mom, I've got to have this PlayStation. You don't understand. And maybe for you, it's like, man, I got to get some of them Yeezys. I need some of those AirPods. Christmas came around and I never got my AirPods. Well, Paul is coming to Christians with a kind of attitude that is begging them, saying, listen, you have to get this. I'm begging you. You cannot miss this. And he says, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. Now, Paul says, there's one thing you've got to hear. I'm begging that you listen. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. It's like, man, I don't even know. What are you talking about? Living sacrifices? What is this? What are you talking about? Well, for us to better understand that statement, we have to realize that Paul was Jewish. Paul was actually a Jewish teacher. He was a rabbi. And he had grown up under the Jewish law, and he had grown up with an understanding of the Old Testament, and he did a lot of ministry with Jewish people. And so for us to understand what he's saying here, we need to understand the mindset that he had. Now, you guys remember back to the Old Testament, God told Moses to create this tabernacle, and later on, David would create a temple. And in Leviticus 1, all the way to chapter 7, we find out that there were sacrifices that had to be made at the temple. There were 5 sacrifices, actually 5 offerings, which is that same word that Paul uses, that you would present yourself, that you would offer yourself. There was the burnt offering, the grain offering, the peace offering, the sin offering, and the transgression or the trespass offering. And none of these were vegan things. I mean, animals were dying here. So in every one of these offerings, actually except for the grain offering, because the grain offering, you would just bring grain. So I guess that one wasn't very gluten-friendly. But in all of these offerings, an animal had to die. And so this is the way that the Jewish people would worship God. They would say, God, we want peace with you, so we're going to bring an animal, put it on the altar. It's going to die. It's going to give its life, and you will receive that as our worship. Aren't you guys glad, can I just say, aren't you guys glad that the way that we worship has changed a little bit in the last 4,000 years? We've got Hillsong and Bethel, and this is living now. It's nobody's killing cats up here. Nobody's slaughtering a lamb up here. But for the Jewish people, the way that they worshiped God was to offer these animals as a sacrifice to die and say, God, you are more worthy of praise than this animal is of life. God, you are worth the life of this animal. God, you are so valuable. And so they would give these animals as gifts to God. Now, when you give someone a present, it kind of reveals to that person how much you value them, right? So if you've got a best friend, you usually probably put a little bit of thought into what you're going to get that person. If it's somebody's birthday, your fourth cousin that you hardly know, and your mom's like, all right, you've got to pick out a present. It's I don't know, that looks fine. Give him that. But if it's your best friend or your girlfriend or whoever it is, somebody really close to you, you're probably putting a little bit of effort. Imagine if my wife's birthday came around and like right before I went home after work on her birthday, I was just like, oh yeah, her birthday, I should pick up a present. So I swing by like 7-Eleven and I grab a Snickers bar and I'm like, yeah, that should suffice. And I go home and I'm like, happy birthday, honey. And she's like, oh man, like you put zero effort into this. You haven't given, like you didn't spend more than $1.29. Even though Snickers are great and they do satisfy, doesn't really show her like I put a lot of effort into it. And when I don't value the gift that I'm giving her, it demonstrates that I don't value her a whole lot. Does that make sense? And so what Paul communicates and what the Jewish people would understand is that God is so valuable that they would give a living thing as a gift to say, God, you are so worthy of everything that we have and more. And Paul would say the same thing. He says, Christians, listen, I beseech you, I beg you, present yourselves, present your body as a sacrifice unto God. And so one of the biggest things that I think God would want to communicate tonight is that he has called us to a serious commitment. You know, Jesus isn't looking for part-time followers. Jesus isn't looking for us to simply like his Facebook page and then kind of like forget about him and never message. Jesus isn't looking that we just join a club and attend on Thursday nights and then do whatever we want the rest of the week. Jesus not only is looking for, but deserves and is worthy of an all-out, full-on commitment. And that's what Paul would lead us to conclude, is that Jesus is worthy of our bodies being a sacrifice unto him. But notice that he says a living sacrifice. That's important, and that's helpful, because if he had said, hey, just present your bodies as a sacrifice, it's like, oh my gosh, like, Paul, am I supposed to just like go over here on this altar and just literally die? Am I just supposed to, is today, like when I come forward, can you imagine if that was an altar call? It was like, hey guys, if you want to give your life to Jesus, we just want you to come up here right after the service, come up right now. And the people come forward and it's like, okay, there's a room right over here where you're all going to go die. No, that's not God's plan for us. God's plan is that we would be a living, breathing sacrifice, that our life would be lived and given to him. So does that mean like we're walking, but we're dead? We're the walking dead? No, the idea and the implication is that every day there is a continual giving of ourselves as a gift to God. So it's as if every morning we can wake up and we can say, all of me, Jesus, for you. All of me, always, in every part of my life for you. And this is something that the Jews were well acquainted with. And have you guys heard of that prayer called the Shema? There's something called the Shema, and it's a prayer that is recited every single day. Even still, devout Jews today will recite it, and it goes, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And then this part you've probably definitely heard, and it's repeated several times throughout the Bible, says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. And I just know that the temptation exists for me sometimes to be a Sunday morning Christian. It's like, wait, he's a pastor. Did he just say that? Maybe the temptation exists for you to be like, all right, I love Spectrum. I'm going to party it up at Spectrum. I'm going to sing songs saying, God, I surrender all. And then Friday morning, I'm just like, no, nobody needs to know that I'm a Christian. I'm not going to be reading my Bible. I'm not going to be spending time with him. Like, I'm just kind of going to do my own thing. But this says, with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. See, God doesn't want to be the God of your Thursdays alone. He wants to be the God of your life. And that may seem like really daunting. And that may seem like, yeah, but can't he just be satisfied with a Christmas gift? Can't he be satisfied with a once-a-week conversation? Can't he be satisfied with us hanging out on Thursday nights? And I just want to bring a little bit of relief because Paul, at this point, like, it could sound super heavy, which it is. I mean, even Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he was like this. He was a German shepherd, which is, he wasn't a dog. He was actually German, and he was a pastor, and thus he was a German shepherd. But bad. That was like such a, I've got 2 kids. Those are the jokes I tell. But he says when Jesus calls a man, he bids him come and die. And so it is heavy stuff, but then I want to tell you this. And this is our second point. It only makes sense. It only makes sense. See, we could be like, Jesus, that is too tall of an order for you to call us to. Come on, Paul, that is so serious that my whole life would be sacrificed for God. But Paul would argue, no, this is the only logical response to what God has done. Check it out. He says, this is your reasonable service. He's not calling us to a blind faith. The word reasonable communicates this idea of being logical. It's a logical train of thought that because of God, then this. If this, then that. So for instance, my wife and I were playing Monopoly last night, late at night. That's what you do when you get married. You stay up late and you play Monopoly. And it's a blast. And I can't wait for you guys to be able to play Monopoly. And with your spouse. Because it's a blast. But we were playing Monopoly, and I'm like kind of ruthless, and I am always like trying to like find the art of the deal. I'm always like, okay, I've got Boardwalk, but maybe I can convince her to trade me, one of the little brown ones. Does anyone Park Place? Oh, what's the one what's one of the little brown ones? Like the super, super, super cheap ones. Like I've got the most expensive piece, and I'm always like, hey, do you want to trade me your super inexpensive area for my super expensive? She's just like, no, that's not logical. That's not reasonable. I'm never going to make that trade. Another example. How many of you have played Pokemon Go? Yeah, let me just tell you this. Before Pokemon Go, which is like all digital and everything, we used to actually trade real Pokemon cards. This is like early 2000s. Anyone out there ever have real Pokemon cards? Yeah. Okay, now the party's getting started. So, back in like elementary school, middle school, you would pay like $20, $30. You would go to all of these shops around town, Noble, and you'd pay like $30 for a holographic Charizard or something like that. And then some kid would have like a Jigglypuff, and he would be like, hey man, like I'll trade you my Jigglypuff for your Charizard. And you're like, no, that is completely unreasonable. That does not compute. Right now, Donald Trump is trying to broker a deal and have peace talks with Kim Jong-un, who's got like nuclear weapons and is trying to blow up the world and everything. And so, Donald Trump will say, if you give up your nukes, we'll give you Dennis Rodman. Like, they're trying to broker reasonable deals. Well, Paul says that it is our reasonable service. He says it's not blind faith. God's not calling you to do this big thing based off of nothing. He says it's the most reasonable thing that you can do. Well, why is being a sacrifice reasonable? Well, he points it out. He actually starts the verse out with it. He says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God. See, what you need to understand, we're here in Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, but the previous 11 chapters of the book of Romans is Paul just expositing and going over the theology of the gospel. In Romans chapters 1 through 3, he's talking about how all of us have sinned, that every one of us has gone astray, that we have all fallen short of the glory, that there is none righteous. He's saying that we as humans, we are all condemned and deserving of judgment. But guess what? Jesus has provided justification. He has provided himself as a sacrifice. And so Romans chapter 3 through chapter 5, he makes the argument that because of what Jesus did, we can be saved. And even though we've fallen short, we can be righteous. And even though we are criminals, we can be innocent because of Jesus. And then chapter 6 through 8, he talks about how Jesus will provide for us a better life. I love that your guys' slogan here at Spectrum is life to the full. And that's exactly what Jesus provides. And so Paul, for 11 chapters, says, God is merciful, God is merciful, God is merciful, God is merciful. Therefore, it is reasonable that you would live your lives for him. There's a song that we sing often here at Calvary. It's called So Will I. And it starts off and it says, God of creation, as you speak, billions of galaxies are born. God of creation, as you speak, animals are created and they all reveal your majesty. It goes on to say, God of your promise, every word that you speak is fulfilled. But then it says, God of creation, or God of salvation, on a hill that you created, the light of the world was abandoned in darkness to die. Paul argues and says, if the God that created everything, if the God that created us, and we rebelled against him, and if the God that created us and forgave us and was stripped naked and was nailed to a wooden cross, if he died so that you could live, if he paid your punishment, then isn't it reasonable that you live your life for him? Isn't it reasonable? And I want to point out that this isn't Paul saying like, Jesus is going to cash in and I owe you, like I did this, so you better do that. That is not the mindset at all. He's saying it's reasonable. Every one of us is going to worship someone. And isn't it most reasonable that we worship the God that lays down his life for us? If there's someone that we're going to follow, doesn't it make the most sense that we follow the one who loves us to the point of death, even the death of the cross? It's simple logic. And so when we consider the extent of his grace, when we consider the amount of his mercy, we can conclude that we come to a place and we say, Jesus, all of me, always, all of me in every part of my life, all of me in every relationship that exists, all of me, always. Our third point is made by the Word. And this is where we get to kind of discover the will of God part of this. He says, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Do not conform to the pattern of the world of this world, is the way that the NIV puts it. It says, don't be molded into the image of this world. And in fact, that word pattern would indicate Paul's not saying like, hey, don't dress the same way that everyone else dresses. He's saying, hey, don't have the same mindset. Don't have the same value system that the world has. Christian, you and I should look different from the world. Not that we have to do our hair different or paint our nails different or wear different shoes. We don't have to like go be Amish and be the most awkward people in the world that don't know how to talk to anyone and smell like sunscreen. But the way that we live our lives and the value system that we have in us, the things, the goals that we're striving after, they should be different. They should look different than the world. See, the world hopes to find security. The mindset of the world is like, okay, get all this money and then you can have your security in your salary. But Jesus says, you can't even count on your salary lasting tomorrow. Find your security in my sovereignty. Find your identity not in what other people say about you, but find your identity in what I've already spoken over you. Don't find your identity in your accomplishments, but find your identity in what he has accomplished for you. There's a verse in Luke 15:12, I think, and it says that what is esteemed, what is thought highly of in the eyes of man is an abomination in the sight of God. And so when we say, man, life is all about number one, it's all about me, it's all about achieving and getting to this level of success, God says, you're going to lose it all. And none of that's going to sustain you, and none of that will truly prove to be life to the full. Let's talk about influence for a moment. Let's talk about Play-Doh and influence. I've got a 2.5-year-old, I told you that. Chantel told you that. His name's Cambridge. And we play Play-Doh like all day long. When you've got a 2.5-year-old, that's what you do, is Play-Doh and crayons and markers on the wall and punching little sister on accident and over and not on accident and discipline and I don't want to and why. But Play-Doh is part of that. Play-Doh is part of the day. Play-Doh. Any of you know Matt Griego? He's a fantastic guy. He's one of the pastors here. He's been a leader here. Well, sometimes Matt will play Play-Doh with Cambridge and I. And Matt is like immaculate. Like he just like everything that he does with that clay turns into gold. He's got the Midas touch. So you know those hunter boots? Like he designed, like he made, I don't know why a hunter boot, but he did. He was up for the challenge. It was like rain boots. He's like, all right, let's see if I can make a rain boot. And it was like the spitting image of a rain boot. And then he's like, I'm going to make a couch. And I was like, oh my gosh, I would buy that couch from you, even though it's an inch tall. Like and then he'll make a duck and you can like see the feathers and there's just so much detail. And there's like little nostrils in the bill of the duck. And so Matt gets his hands on this clay dough and he makes a masterpiece. Well, my son will get that lump of clay in his hands, and the very best thing that will come out is like something that slightly resembles a ball. It's like, I guess that's like a kind of spherical, but maybe not. Or maybe like he'll make like a noodle. You know how you get the Play-Doh and you rub it in your hands, and it's like, look, Dad, a snake. And it's like, yeah, that's a really terrifying snake, kid. Well, the same lump of clay can become either a masterpiece or a mess, depending on whose hands it's in. And so what you become is going to be determined by who is shaping you. What you and I become and who we become is going to be determined by the people who are influencing us, the people and the things that are influencing us. And so if you and I are looking a whole lot like the world, if we're looking like everybody else that walks this planet and there's nothing in our lives that really tells us apart from them, then maybe we should take inventory of what is influencing us. Maybe we should take inventory of the things that are getting in our minds, because Paul says, don't be conformed to the image of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. See, transformation goes so much further than being conformed. Transformation talks about making something completely, entirely, altogether new. And I want to tell you this, that God isn't after behavior modification in us. And there's nothing, I hope so badly this message isn't saying like, you need to be a better person. God's not after us becoming a better person. He's about making us a new person. He's about making us new in him. In fact, that's what 2 Corinthians tells us, is that if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away, and behold, all things have become new. Since Cambridge has become like such a centerpiece in this message, I thought I might bring you one of his favorite books. Has anyone ever heard The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle? Ladies and gentlemen, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. I thought maybe, since we've got a few minutes left, I could read this to you. And maybe God will somehow redeem us reading this book together. If you haven't read before, allow me to do the honor. One Sunday morning, the warm sun came up, and pop, out of the egg came a tiny and very hungry caterpillar. He started to look for some food. He was hungry. On Monday, he ate through one apple, but he was still hungry. On Tuesday, he ate through 2 pears, but he was still hungry. On Wednesday, he ate through 3 plums, but he was still hungry. On Thursday, he ate through 4 strawberries, but he was still hungry. On Friday, he ate through 5 oranges. I'm so glad you guys are tracking with this phenomenal book. On Saturday, he ate through 1 piece of chocolate cake, 1 ice cream cone, 1 pickle, 1 slice of Swiss cheese, 1 slice of salami, 1 lollipop, 1 piece of cherry pie, 1 sausage, 1 cupcake, and 1 slice of watermelon. That night, he had a stomachache. Aww. The next day was Sunday again. The caterpillar ate through 1 nice green leaf, and after that, he felt much better. Now he wasn't hungry anymore, and he wasn't a little caterpillar anymore. He was a big, fat caterpillar. So I've read this like 100 times, so the same enunciation that happens every night with Cambridge is happening here. So he built a small house called a cocoon around himself. He stayed inside for more than 2 weeks. Then he nibbled a hole in the cocoon and pushed his way out. And he was a beautiful butterfly. Man, thank you. I'll be here all night. Just kidding. It's like, what a terrible way to end. So, moral of the story, this caterpillar turns into a butterfly. Complete metamorphosis, right? Complete transformation, complete brand new creation. But how did it happen? He was hungry. And he fed, and he fed, and he fed, and he ate, and he ate, and he ate. And the lesson for us is that the way that God will transform you into the person that he wants you to be is by feeding on his word, by spending time in scripture, by developing an appetite for his truth. Jesus said, sanctify them, God, by your truth. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. And I want you to know that God doesn't want you to stay the same person that you've always been. He wants to transform you. He wants to make you into something absolutely otherly. He wants us to stand out, and the way that happens is by us digesting his word, which is why it's so awesome that you come to Spectrum and hear messages about the Bible every single week. But I would encourage you, take it to the next level if you haven't. Be in the Bible daily, asking God, I want to see you. I want to understand your truth, because I don't want to stay the same. I want you to transform me. I want you to change me. And I want you to use this changed person to change this world. Paul says, when we do this, that we prove what is good and acceptable and perfect, the perfect will of God. And he points out that we will prove what is that will of God, that we won't discover it. What he isn't saying is that, if you do this, then God will finally trust you, and then he'll tell you his 10-year plan. He says, no, when you do this, you will be doing the very will of God. And you might ask me, well, how in the world does that help me know who to date, or what college to go to, or what school to go to, or what job to get? And I want to tell you, it doesn't matter which school you go to. It matters what kind of a student you are at that school. And if you're doing this, then you're going to be the right kind of student, and you're going to be in the will of God. It doesn't matter what job you're going to chase down, because it matters who you are at that job. And you'll be in the will of God. And so if we approach life saying, all of life is all for Jesus, all of me always for God, then we cannot fail. And we cannot come to a place where we have to say, God, what is your will for me? Because you are the will of God. I want to give you just a few final quick tools for decision making, because I know that decisions can still be terrifying. The first tool is consult the crew. You guys have got to have a crew around you, which is why it's so crucial to be a part of Spectrum groups, because you can have friends that can encourage you, and you've got leaders who can speak into your life. Proverbs says that in the counsel of the godly there is safety. Where there is no counsel, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors there is safety. There was this guy, Rehoboam. He was a king in Israel. He was Solomon's son. And when he became king, there were these really wise counselors that were saying, okay, you should probably back off the taxes. Don't tax the people as much as your dad did. He was really harsh. You shouldn't tax them as much. He heard that from some counselors, older people, wiser people, leaders, mentors. But then he went and he talked to his friends and he said, what do you guys think I should do? And they said, well, if you tax the people more, that means you get more money. So tax the people and be ruthless and tell everyone that your little pinky is thicker than your father's thigh. And it's like, what a strange saying that is. But he listened to them. And so I would counter with this, or add to, consult the crew. Make sure that you don't just have people around you that say yes to everything you want. Make sure that you have people in your life that can challenge you and offer a perspective that's different than yours. The second thing that I would suggest, by the way, Abraham Lincoln, all of the people that he put in his presidential cabinet were people that disagreed with his policies, because he knew that if he was being challenged, then he would make the better decisions. So the second thing that I would tell you is get in the game. Get in the game. Colossians 3 tells us, whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward for your inheritance. So whatever you do, this word, he starts with the assumption that the Christians were doing something, that they weren't just sitting around doing nothing, but he was saying, whatever you do, do it to God. And that's the second part that I would include in that, is if it's not something that you can do unto God, then don't do it. But if it's something, for instance, I'm going to go steal that car unto the glory of God. It's like, that doesn't really work out, because you know that's a sin, and so that's not going to be God's will, right? But if there's anything that you're passionate about, if there's something you want to try, if there's something that you think God's called you to, do it, and then do it unto him. Do it for his name's sake. Do it for his glory. Try it out. The third tool that I would tell you is love God and live life. Love God and live life. About 10 years ago, that makes me sound old. About 10 years ago, I was going to leave New Mexico, and I was like, man, should I move to, I had 4 different states in mind, Montana, Tennessee, Arizona, or I guess stay here in New Mexico. And I was like so stressed about it. I was like, man, I've got job offers at a few different states. Like, I don't know which one to go with. And I was like having all of this anxiety. And I was like, God, what is your will? I just want you to tell me what I'm supposed to do. And I got counsel from a mentor of mine. And I met up with him at Einstein Bagels, because the best ideas happen around bagels. And he told me, Matt, all of these decisions, all of these things, you're deciding to do them because you want to serve God. So choose any of these, keep serving God, and he's going to bless it. If God is your top priority, then any decision after that will not be a failure. And so love God and do what you want. That's something that St. Augustine said. In fact, Psalms tells us, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And then the last thing that I would leave you with is pray, pray, pray. Colossians prayed, and Paul in Colossians prayed for the church. And he said, for this reason, since the day we heard it, we do not cease to pray for you and to ask that you would be filled with the knowledge of his will in all wisdom and spiritual understanding. So I'd say pray, pray, pray. If you're trying to make a big decision, pray, 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 and then just trust him. And if you're not hearing like a specific answer, then take a leap. Make a decision that you want and trust that he'll bless it. Let me tell you this, though. we will find our greatest pleasure when we are living for his. See, if our goal in life is just to get to God's will and just to understand, if our aim is understanding what God's will is, then we're going to miss it. But if our aim is God, then we're going to be in his will. Understanding what his plan is for you, what his hopes are for you, what his goal is for you. It doesn't have to be as scary or as difficult as being a detective in an escape room. All I am, always for Jesus. God, we thank you that you are not a God that hides your plans from us. You're not a God that we have to play hide and seek with. You're not a God that is unapproachable, but you are near. And God, I just ask that maybe this message is for people who are struggling with making decisions. God, I ask that in every part of our lives, we would be sold out for you and that you would consume every bit of us. Jesus, we want to praise you. We thank you that you are a good God and that you are near to us. We just want to give you glory. And right now, we just want to say, you are worth all of us. You are worth every breath in our lungs. And we want to close and sing to you with that breath in our lungs.